Welcome back to the Deep Dives. Today we are wrestling with an idea so radical it challenges, well, pretty much everything we assume about global power, control, and even how wealth is made. We are diving deep into a concept that our source material insists will define the next 100 years, digital geometry.
And that framing is key, isn't it? Because the authors of this manifesto we've been analyzing, they argue the 21st century won't be about new ideologies.
Right, not another rerun of capitalism versus communism or anything like that.
Exactly. It's going to be defined by new geometries, a fundamental, almost physical restructuring of how power, how prosperity, and crucially, how data flows across the entire human network. It's about the shape of connection.
Okay, let's unpack that. Geometry. It implies, shape matters more than just sheer size or scale. We've been digging into this blueprint, and the headline figure,
Yeah.
it's just staggering.
It really is.
Universal, verifiable connectivity, when structured in this specific geometric way, could unlock over $50 trillion in new wealth. And the focus is almost entirely on transforming the global south.
That's the core claim. Over $50 trillion. And the mission, as they frame it, is incredibly ambitious. It's about moving potentially 3 billion people from what they call economic invisibility.
Meaning unbanked, undocumented, disconnected.
Precisely. Moving them from that state to full, verifiable participation in the global digital economy. They actually call this process building Civilization version 2.0.
Civilization 2.0, wow.
Yeah, where connectivity creates this new sort of flattened topology of trust and, importantly, accountability.
Okay. And for you listening right now, our goal in this deep dive is to give you the technical blueprint for how this can actually happen. We're going to meticulously detail the 4 foundational pillars the sources say are non-negotiable for building this new geometric civilization.
And then we'll dig into 2 of the most, frankly, revolutionary concepts that build on those pillars.
Which are?
How digitizing humanity's oldest asset land could unleash trillions in currently frozen value. And then this really radical inversion of governance they call reverse surveillance.
Reverse surveillance. You'll definitely need to unpack that one.
Oh, absolutely. And just to set the stage, the manifesto puts this whole technical shift into a huge historical context. The authors claim this coming age of radical inclusion and wealth. They call it the age of abundance.
Okay.
They suggest it was actually prophesied in various forms thousands of years ago, this idea of ultimate human potential finally being within reach, not through just philosophy this time, but through coordinated planetary scale digital architecture.
That's quite a claim.
Yeah.
It positions this massive tech infrastructure project as almost fulfilling some ancient destiny.
It does. It suggests this isn't just about economics or tech. It's a civilizational realignment where technology becomes the tool to realize a very old dream of material abundance and opportunity for everyone.
Right. So a grand vision built on very specific technical foundations. Let's get into those foundations. So if we accept, just for the sake of argument, that this huge multi-trillion-dollar transformation is even possible, the sources are clear. It needs a different kind of growth.
Right. We have to move beyond linear growth. The factory model, incremental improvement.
The industrial age stuff.
Exactly. Into true geometric development, where inclusion and value scale exponentially, like network effects. And this kind of exponential leap, they argue, rests on 4 non-negotiable structural pillars.
Okay, let's start at the base. Pillar 1, what is it?
Pillar 1 is universal internet access. And manifesto, it gets a bit poetic here, calls it ubiquity as oxygen.
Ubiquity as oxygen. I like that.
Yeah. The core idea, philosophically, is that connectivity has to stop being this, unequal luxury or a privilege. It must be treated as a fundamental public good, a civil right.
Like clean water or basic sanitation, as you said.
Precisely, because if you're excluded from the network today, you're effectively excluded from the modern economy, full stop.
And that phrase, ubiquity as oxygen, feels incredibly relevant now, doesn't it? Given how fast the tech is moving. The sources argue this isn't some far-off dream. It's becoming feasible right now.
It is. And the game changer here has been the rapid deployment of these massive low Earth orbit, or LEO, satellite constellations.
We're talking about Starlink from SpaceX.
Starlink, yeah, OneWeb. And Amazon's Project Kuiper is coming online too. These systems completely bypass the huge cost and time barriers of laying traditional fiber optic cable, especially across difficult terrain.
Jungles, mountains, deserts, remote islands. places fiber might never reach economically.
Exactly. They're rapidly moving towards near-total global coverage. The authors project that within just a few years, high-speed access could reach the most remote mountaintops, isolated archipelagos, deserts, the most rural villages imaginable.
Okay, that sounds amazing. But let me push back a bit here, play devil's advocate. A listener might be thinking, sure, maybe coverage is possible, but what about quality?
Good point.
You know, the low latency, the high bandwidth you actually need for things like real-time financial transactions, remote surgery, complex governance platforms, that takes serious bandwidth. Is high-quality, ubiquitous access truly realistic for, say, a poor village in sub-Saharan Africa anytime soon?
That's the critical question, and the tech addresses it, again, geometrically. First, LEO satellites inherently solve the latency problem, the time delay.
Because they're much closer to Earth than the old geostationary ones.
Exactly. Much closer, hundreds of kilometers versus tens of thousands. So the round trip for the signal is vastly shorter. Second, the sheer scale of investment from these competing global players, Starlink, OneWeb, Kuiper, is creating massive network capacity and redundancy.
Competition driving down costs.
And driving up performance. The source material suggests that once this physical satellite infrastructure is fully deployed, the marginal cost of delivering data, just like the future cost of solar energy, begins to plummet towards near zero.
So that final digital divide, the quality gap, starts to dissolve.
That's the argument. It makes high-level productivity, access to sophisticated services, no longer dependent on your geography. It really becomes the foundational layer. The nervous system, as you said, for everything else: governance, health, finance, education.
Okay, so connectivity is the nervous system. But a network needs nodes, users who can be identified. Which brings us to pillar 2, universal digital identity, or, as the source calls it, ending invisibility.
Right, because right now, a huge chunk of the global population, maybe billions, are unbanked, primarily because they're undocumented.
They exist, but not officially, not in the data.
They're data shadows. They lack the basic verifiable identity needed to open a bank account, access credit, vote securely, claim public resources, even just prove who they are reliably.
And the manifesto points to one massive real-world example as proof this can be done at scale.
Yes, India's Aadhaar program. That's the crucial planetary proof of concept.
Aadhaar, that's the biometric digital ID system covering, what, over 1 billion people now?
Over 1.3 billion, yeah. Its sheer scale is unprecedented.
So what did implementing Aadhaar actually prove, beyond just the numbers?
It proved it's technologically and logistically feasible to provide a unique, verifiable digital identity to vast, incredibly diverse populations. It helps cut through layers of bureaucracy. For the individual, having that verifiable ID is transformative.
How so?
It guarantees access to things like secure voting systems. It ensures public resources like food subsidies or welfare payments actually reach the intended person without being, siphoned off by middlemen.
Tackling leakage.
Exactly. And it enables participation in formal digital marketplaces, both buying and selling. You go from being this sort of anonymous ghost in the system to a fully recognized, verifiable participant in the digital age.
But Aadhaar, it's also been hugely controversial, hasn't it? There are major global debates about privacy, the potential for state surveillance, data security. How does this digital geometry concept address that fundamental tension? The convenience and inclusion versus the risk of centralized control.
That's a central challenge, and the manifesto tackles it head-on. It stresses that the next evolution of digital ID can't just replicate Aadhaar globally. It has to incorporate two crucial upgrades: global interoperability and individual sovereignty.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Global interoperability means your digital ID should work across borders, across different systems, so you're recognized wherever you go. But critically, individual sovereignty means shifting away from purely state-controlled databases.
So the government doesn't just own my identity data.
Exactly. The push is towards models like self-sovereign identity, or SSI, technologies where you, the individual, own and control your own digital credentials. You decide who to share specific attributes with for specific purposes using secure cryptographic methods.
So I can prove I'm over 18 without revealing my birth date, or prove my residency without revealing my exact address.
Precisely. You share only what's necessary. This model, the source argues, actually breaks the monopoly of the traditional intermediaries, the local bureaucrats, the banks, even state agencies who often profit from opacity and friction. The power shifts towards the citizen who holds the keys to their own verifiable identity.
Okay, so we have the connectivity, the oxygen, We have the verifiable identity, the recognized participant. Now we need the circulatory system to move value around this network. That must be pillar 3.
Pillar 3, universal digital banking and cashless flow. This is where money fundamentally changes.
So.
It stops being primarily a physical thing, cash, coins, even plastic cards tied to old systems, and becomes pure information, instantly transmittable information.
And the goal here is frictionless finance.
Essentially, yes, the effective dissolution of financial friction in the global economy. Think about digital wallets, possibly running on modern distributed ledger technologies, DLTs, like blockchains, or maybe just super efficient real-time payment rails. These allow for virtually zero-cost, instant peer-to-peer value exchange. Globally, 200/7.
Zero cost. That phrase keeps coming up. That's huge, especially for the global south. Think about remittances, money sent home by workers abroad. Those fees can be crippling, right? 5%, sometimes 10% or more.
Absolutely tripling. That money just vanishes into the pockets of intermediaries. So how is zero cost technically achievable?
Yeah, how? Because someone has to run the system.
It's achievable by drastically cutting out the layers of those intermediaries. Legacy international payments involve correspondent banks, the SWIFT network, manual reconciliation processes. Each step adds fees and delays, sometimes days.
Right.
Digital geometry leverages systems, whether DLTs or new payment rails, where the transaction is verified and settled almost instantaneously on a shared automated ledger. The main cost remaining is the negligible computational cost of processing the data itself.
So the traditional barriers just melt away.
High bank fees, those remittance costs, arbitrary cross-border restrictions, minimum balance requirements, they dissolve. This enables total financial inclusion. Everyone with a digital ID and a basic smartphone or access point can participate, regardless of how much or how little money they have.
And the implications for government services must be massive, too.
Oh, enormous. The manifesto puts huge emphasis here. Imagine when that verifiable digital ID is securely linked to a citizen's digital wallet.
The government can send payments directly.
Instantly. Targeted subsidies for farmers, universal basic income payments, emergency relief funds, tax refunds, delivered directly into the verified recipient's wallet. Instantly.
And because the ID is verified and the transaction is on a traceable, often immutable ledger.
You eliminate the vast systemic problems of leakage, corruption, and delay. That specific phrase, no leakage, no corruption, no delay, the source argues, becomes the new benchmark. The key metric for measuring the legitimacy and effectiveness of the state in this emerging geometric era.
Wow. No leakage, no corruption, no delay. That's a high bar, but it leads perfectly into the fourth pillar, which you mentioned earlier, feels like the most radical shift.
It is, politically speaking, Pillar 4, reverse surveillance and radical transparency.
Reverse surveillance. So the watchers become the watched.
That's the core idea. It's an architectural inversion of the traditional power dynamic. In the world we mostly live in now, state apparatuses, and corporations too, track and monitor citizens, often with very little transparency.
Right.
In the future, described by this manifesto, the citizens collectively monitor the state, using the same kinds of powerful data processing and network tools. Accountability stops being primarily a political slogan or a reactive process after a scandal breaks.
And becomes...
It becomes an automated, embedded, codified feature of the governmental system itself.
Okay, but let's get practical. How do you actually track every single dollar of public spending? Or every lawmaker's vote, every campaign donation in real time? This scale seems overwhelming. The complexity...
The scale is immense, and the complexity is real. But the proposed solution relies on mandating that all public financial flows, all of them, must be processed through a standardized, transparent, and ideally immutable public ledger. Think of a blockchain-like infrastructure designed for governance.
So, government departments would be legally required to input procurement data, contract awards, budget allocations, actual expenditure disbursements, all onto this shared ledger.
Yeah.
In real time.
That's the proposal. It's not just about archiving receipts after the fact. It's about building a live, searchable, auditable financial map of the entire state apparatus. The technical challenges are significant, absolutely, but the argument is they're manageable if the system architecture is designed correctly from the outset, likely decentralized, using standardized data formats.
And the claimed effect of this, the source material suggests it transforms politics itself from opaque game of power, influence, and backroom deals.
Into a system based on verifiable performance metrics. That's the key insight.
How does that work psychologically or politically?
Well, imagine you're a politician or a public official, If you know that every significant decision you make, how you vote on a budget amendment, which company gets a lucrative infrastructure contract, how funds allocated to your department are actually spent, if you know all of that is instantly visible, permanently recorded, and easily searchable by anyone on a public ledger.
It changes your calculation.
Fundamentally, the fear of immediate, permanent, undeniable exposure becomes, theoretically, the most powerful deterrent against corruption and malfeasance. It's not about relying on goodwill, it's about the architecture making bad behavior incredibly risky and transparent.
So this system is designed to legitimize competent governments because their results are visible.
Their efficiency, their delivery, it's all data-driven and demonstrable.
And it marginalizes corrupt or inefficient actors because their failures or misdeeds are equally visible and undeniable.
Exactly. Democracy, in this vision, becomes less about demagoguery, charisma, and hidden agendas, and more about data-driven governance based on measurable performance. They call it the age of visible governance. It's a profound shift in the relationship between the citizen and the state, built on these 4 pillars.
Okay, so we have the 4 pillars laid out. Universal connectivity as oxygen. Universal digital ID ending in visibility. Universal digital banking for cashless flow. And this radical reverse surveillance for transparency. That's the foundation.
That's the core infrastructure, yes.
Now, the manifesto zooms in on one specific area where this infrastructure can unlock immense value, particularly in the developing world. And that's land. Why such a focus on land?
Because land is, well, it's humanity's oldest and arguably most fundamental asset. But for billions of people, especially in the global south, it's trapped. It's locked in economic and legal uncertainty. The source material highlights a statistic that is just. It's mind-blowing when you think about the implications. In many developing nations, disputes over land ownership and boundaries make up more than 60% of all cases clogging up the court systems.
60%?
Yeah.
Just land disputes.
Over 60%. Imagine the drag that puts on the entire justice system. Imagine the economic cost. Countless hours, resources, tied up in arguments over who owns what piece of ground. It means capital is stagnant. Property can't be easily bought, sold, or used as collateral because ownership is ambiguous.
So it's not just a legal problem. It's a massive economic bottleneck rooted in unclear titles, maybe poor paper records, conflicting traditional claims, sometimes outright fraud.
All of the above. Generations of uncertainty piled on top of each other. The solution proposed by digital geometry is about applying radical clarity using the new tools.
How do you bring clarity to something as historically messy as land ownership?
It's essentially a 2-step technological process outlined in the sources. Step 1, digitize every single plot of land. Use high-resolution satellite imagery, drone mapping, GPS surveys, whatever is needed to create precise, unambiguous digital boundary maps.
Okay, so you get a clear picture of what the land is.
Exactly. Step 2, register the verified ownership information on a public, immutable ledger. This means recording the title, the transaction history, any latents or encumbrances onto something like a blockchain.
So the ownership record becomes indisputable, tamper-proof, and instantly verifiable by anyone with access, like checking a public database.
Precisely. Forgery becomes incredibly difficult. Disputes based on lost papers become irrelevant. The history and ownership are transparent and secure.
And the moment that clarity is achieved, the moment a family, say, goes from just occupying a piece of land to possessing a clear, digitally verified, bankable title. What happens then, economically?
Yeah. That's when the economic windfall begins. It's described as seismic. Secure, verifiable property rights transform the local economy in 3 immediate powerful ways, and they're all linked to credit.
Okay, break those down.
First, every family or individual with a secure digital title instantly gains verifiable collateral, something real, recognized, and valued by the financial system.
They have something to borrow against.
Exactly. Which leads to the second point. Every single parcel of land, previously maybe just subsistence farmland or a place to live, becomes a bankable asset. It can be immediately leveraged within the formal financial system.
And the third impact.
Because the ownership is clear and the asset is bankable, every farmer, every small shop owner, every local entrepreneur with that digital title potentially gains access to pre-approved loans or microcredit.
Why pre-approved?
Because the biggest risk for the lender, the uncertainty about ownership and the difficulty of seizing collateral in case of default, has been dramatically reduced, almost eliminated. The digital title provides that security.
So land shifts from being this static, often contentious thing
To being a dynamic engine of financial empowerment. It starts generating credit flows where none existed before, or where credit was only available through informal, often predatory lenders. That's the core transformation. The sources project this single change, digitizing land rights, could unleash trillions of dollars in new credit flows globally.
Trillions, just from clarifying ownership of existing assets.
Yes. And that credit doesn't just sit there. It gets channeled immediately into productive investments at the grassroots level. Buying better seeds or tools, investing in irrigation, expanding a small workshop, improving housing, starting a new local business.
It fuels bottom-up economic growth.
Massively. When millions of smallholders and entrepreneurs suddenly gain access to affordable, collateralized credit, it kickstarts small business creation, boosts agricultural productivity, and drives rural industrialization in a way top-down aid often fails to do. Land, civilization's foundational asset, finally gets plugged into the 21st century digital economy.
This whole structure, the clarity from the 4 pillars plus digitized land, leads the manifesto to make another really bold claim. You mentioned it earlier, the end of artificial scarcity.
Yes. This one really challenges core economic assumptions.
Because traditional economics is basically the study of scarcity, right? How we allocate limited resources, land, labor, capital, energy. They're all assumed to be scarce.
That's been the dominant paradigm for centuries. But the manifesto argues that once this digital network infrastructure is complete, once the geometry of trust and transparency is established, much of what we perceive as scarcity today isn't inherent or physical. It's artificial.
Artificial, meaning?
Meaning it's manufactured. It's a byproduct of inefficiency, of deliberate exclusion, of bureaucratic friction, of information asymmetry, of poor coordination. It's not that the resources aren't potentially there, but our systems prevent them from being accessed or utilized effectively.
Okay, that's a big claim. Do they give concrete examples of how this artificial scarcity supposedly collapses?
They do. They point to several key areas where network completion and digital geometry could lead to abundance, or at least dramatically reduce scarcity.
Such as?
Well, energy scarcity, they argue, starts to collapse when renewable sources like solar become dominant, especially if you imagine decentralized solar farms, perhaps built and managed by automated systems or local co-ops, making the marginal cost of electricity generation fall towards near zero. Energy becomes abundant and localized.
Yeah, what else?
Financial scarcity. This collapses, or at least significantly reduces, when digital credit systems, peer-to-peer lending platforms, and efficient microfinance replace the slow, expensive gatekeeping functions of traditional centralized banks. Capital becomes more fluid and accessible to those who need it, based on verifiable identity and assets, not just existing wealth or connections.
Makes sense. And the third example?
Perhaps the most profound, knowledge scarcity. This collapses when high-quality education, scientific research, complex data sets, best practices in farming or health. When all of that becomes universally accessible online, instantly to anyone with a connection, your geographic location or your family's wealth no longer dictates your access to the world's knowledge.
So energy, finance, knowledge. The traditional pillars of economic limitation start to crumble under the weight of efficient networked information.
That's the vision. When the marginal cost of transmitting information, securing identity, verifying assets, and accessing capital approaches zero, which is the theoretical endpoint of this geometric shift, then what is truly scarce anymore?
Good question. What does the manifesto say?
It says the only truly significant scarcity that remains is leadership.
Leadership. Not resources, not capital, not knowledge, but leadership.
Yes. The human capacity to coordinate effectively, to govern wisely, to build and maintain trust within this new high-speed transparent system. The challenge shifts entirely from managing physical shortages to managing human cooperation and political will.
And this ties back to that age of abundance idea you mentioned.
Exactly. It suggests an age of unprecedented material possibility is dawning, thanks to technology. But realizing that potential still hinges entirely on our ability to organize ourselves morally and effectively. The technology provides the means, but the human element, leadership, trust, coordination, remains the final, critical scarcity.
Okay, let's circle back to that headline number because it's almost hard to grasp. $50 trillion. How does this value actually get unlocked? The manifesto is clear. It's not about printing money or just accumulating more debt, right?
Absolutely not. It's fundamentally about releasing locked value, value that already exists in potential, but is currently dormant, inaccessible, or lost due to the inefficiencies and exclusions of the current system.
And the sources break down where this released value comes from.
Yes, they identify three primary interconnected and compounding sources that generate this new wealth.
Okay, let's take them one by one. What's the first source?
The first and perhaps the largest pool is unleashing latent human capital.
Latent human capital, meaning the potential of people who are currently marginalized.
Precisely. Think about those roughly 3 billion people we mentioned earlier, unbanked, undocumented, largely operating outside the formal economy. By bringing them into the system with verifiable digital identities and access to digital finance,
You turn them into active economic participants.
you transform them from invisible shadows into full, verified, productive market participants. Their skills, their labor, their entrepreneurial ideas, their consumption activity that was previously confined to the informal, often untaxed and unmeasured economy suddenly joins the formal, measurable, global digital economy.
And the sheer scale of that influx.
It's massive. The resulting increase in transaction volume, the explosion of small-scale entrepreneurship enabled by microcredit, the boost in consumption, it represents a huge expansion of the global economic base.
Okay, so that's source number one, activating billions of people. What's the second?
The second source is unlocking frozen assets. This ties directly back to the land digitization we just discussed.
Right, turning disputed or unusable land into bankable collateral.
Exactly. It's the trillions of dollars currently locked up in land and property value that cannot be used effectively because ownership is unclear or insecure. By digitizing titles and making them verifiable and secure.
You turn passive assets into active instruments for credit generation.
Precisely. You generate immense new pools of investment capital, collateralized by real assets, which can then flow immediately into productive uses, building infrastructure, expanding businesses, improving livelihoods.
Okay, human capital, frozen assets.
Yeah.
What's the third leg of this stool?
The third critical component is reduce leakage. This comes directly from Pillar 4, the radical transparency and reverse surveillance of government finances.
So this is about stopping the waste and corruption.
It's about recovering the massive amounts of public funds that are currently lost or leaked through corruption, bureaucratic inefficiency, fraud, and simple delays in the system.
Billions, potentially trillions globally.
Easily. When governments can deliver every subsidy, every welfare payment, every tax refund, every infrastructure contract payment directly, instantly, and traceably with zero leakage,
That money, which was previously being siphoned off or wasted.
is instantly freed up. It can be used for its intended purpose or reinvested into other productive public services or infrastructure development. The manifesto argues that these three streams combined empowering latent human capital, collateralizing frozen assets, and drastically reducing leakage compound each other to generate that estimated $50 trillion in new wealth creation. And crucially, this value is overwhelmingly concentrated in the economies that need it most, the Global South.
It really sounds like this new economic model needs a different way of measuring success. Traditional GDP, focus on production output, feels inadequate for describing this.
It is. GDP measures linear activity. Digital geometry, as the name implies, requires us to think about and measure connectivity and potential in a network structure.
How do you measure connectivity value?
The core principle here is geometric growth, often illustrated by Metcalfe's law from telecommunications.
Metcalfe's law. Refresh my memory on that one.
Metcalfe's law states that the value or utility of a network is proportional not just to the number of connected users, n, but roughly to the square of the number of users, n squared.
Okay, so value grows much faster than the number of users.
Exponentially faster. Every new node, every person, every village, every small business that connects to this global digital network doesn't just add its own small bit of value.
It increases the potential value for everyone else already on the network.
Exactly. Because it dramatically increases the number of potential connections, transactions, collaborations, and information exchanges across the entire system. Connecting one new farmer in, say, rural Kenya doesn't just benefit that farmer.
It benefits the local cooperative they can now trade with digitally, the regional bank that can offer them a microloan based on their digital land title, the logistics company that can track their produce, maybe even a global buyer looking for new suppliers.
Precisely. The value ripples outwards and compounds. So the argument is the primary growth engine of the next century won't be building more factories in the traditional sense. It will be geometric, driven by expanding this network of verifiable data, codified trust, and frictionless coordination. It's about connecting everyone, everywhere, seamlessly.
Creating this global network, this Civilization 2.0, obviously requires enormous upfront investment. Building the satellite constellations, the ID systems, the digital payment rails, the governance ledgers. How does the manifesto suggest this gets financed? Who pays for it?
It requires a strategic convergence, a partnership, between three distinct sources of capital. They need to work together.
Okay, what are the three sources?
First, public funds. This means major investment from multilateral institutions, think the World Bank, the IMF, regional development banks. The source material argues strongly that these institutions need an urgent mandate shift.
Shifting from what to what?
Shifting from focusing primarily on traditional 20th century development aid like funding dams, roads, physical infrastructure to prioritizing funding the foundational digital infrastructure of the 21st century.
So funding national digital ID frameworks, data governance systems, ensuring baseline connectivity, that becomes the new core mission for development aid.
That's the argument. Treat digital infrastructure as essential public utility, the bedrock for everything else. Second source, private capital.
Okay, where does the private sector, the profit motive, fit into this?
Private capital is crucial for driving innovation, speed, and efficiency. We're seeing huge investments already in satellite internet, fintech, AI, blockchain applications. The key, according to the sources, is developing sustainable, profitable business models that align with the goal of inclusion.
What might those models look like?
It could involve things like charging tiny fractional microfees on the now massive volume of digital transactions flowing through the system, or creating new financial instruments like transparency bonds tied to the measurable reduction in government leakage achieved through the new systems, or data marketplaces where anonymized, aggregated data is licensed ethically. The core idea is that in this new geometry, inclusion itself, connecting more people, enabling more transactions, becomes inherently profitable if structured correctly.
Okay, public funds for the foundation, private capital for innovation and scale. What's the third source?
The third and perhaps most democratizing source is citizen capital.
Citizen capital, you mean individuals investing?
Yes. The idea is to use digital micro-investment platforms to allow ordinary citizens to become direct co-owners and stakeholders in the new infrastructure that serves them.
How would that work? Give me an example.
Imagine a village or a community collectively investing, maybe through tokenized shares purchased via their digital wallets, in the local solar microgrid or the community broadband tower.
So they own a piece of the infrastructure itself.
Exactly. And they receive a direct return on their investment, perhaps through a share of the energy sold or the data service fees generated by that infrastructure. This does two things. It provides a crucial source of grassroots funding, and perhaps, more importantly,
It gives people a direct stake in the success of the system. It democratizes ownership.
precisely. It democratizes both wealth creation and ownership, turning citizens from passive recipients into active participants and beneficiaries of the network's growth. It builds buy-in and ensures the benefits are shared widely.
Now, the sources point out a fascinating irony here. The global south, often seen as behind in the industrial era, might actually have a significant advantage in adopting this digital geometry. They can potentially leapfrog the developed world.
Yes, there's a powerful argument for leapfrogging. They have a crucial advantage: policy freedom and less institutional inertia.
Meaning they aren't stuck with old systems.
Exactly. They aren't burdened by the immense technical debt of complex, often inefficient 20th century legacy systems. Think paper-based land registries, aging physical bank branches, deeply entrenched bureaucratic processes that are hard to change.
While developing nations can potentially build fresh.
They can adopt cloud-native, mobile-first, digital-by-default systems from the ground up. They can design 21st century regulatory frameworks optimized for transparency, speed, and inclusion without having to dismantle decades of old infrastructure and vested interests first.
That's a huge advantage. And demographics play a role, too.
A massive role. Populations, particularly in Africa and South Asia, are significantly younger, more digitally native, and often more willing to adopt new technologies rapidly compared to older populations in some developed countries. They're primed for this kind of transformation.
So the analogy the source uses, like mobile money,
Right. Aadhaar in Kenya revolutionized mobile payments long before similar systems gained traction in the US or Europe. The manifesto suggests that digital geometry could similarly make cities like Lagos or Jakarta or Dhaka the primary laboratories for developing and improving these next-generation models of governance and economic inclusion. They could become the pioneers of Civilization 2.0 precisely because they have less legacy to overcome.
We've covered the why, the $50 trillion unlock, the end of artificial scarcity, and the four pillars and digitizing land. Now let's get deeper into the how. Specifically, how do you actually build this visible governance, this system where citizens monitor the state? What's the technical architecture that enables radical transparency?
Okay, yeah, the architecture is critical. Transparency isn't just a policy, it has to be encoded into the infrastructure. The source outlines several key components. First, blockchain governance ledgers.
We touched on this. Governments essentially have to operate on public, immutable ledgers for all their financial activities.
That's the foundation. Every public expenditure, every contract awarded, all procurement data. Ideally, budget allocations themselves must be recorded on a verifiable, distributed ledger accessible to the public.
So if I'm a citizen, I should be able to follow the money, like track my tax contribution from the national budget allocation all the way down to, say, the specific school that received funds for new books.
That's the goal, real-time traceability. And the DLT architecture, the blockchain element, is what provides the crucial immutability. Once a transaction is verified and added to the ledger, say a contract is digitally signed and recorded, it becomes computationally infeasible to alter or delete it without leaving a permanent, obvious trace detectable by the entire network.
Okay, so the ledger provides the raw, trustworthy data. How is that data made useful to ordinary people?
That leads to the second architectural requirement, real-time democracy dashboards.
Dashboards, so like websites or apps that visualize this data.
Exactly, but far more comprehensive than what we typically see today. These would be publicly accessible portals designed to be user-friendly, showing key governance metrics in granular detail.
What kind of detail are we talking about?
Real-time tracking of tax revenue inflows versus budget commitments, precise progress reports on public infrastructure projects, maybe even with geotagged photos or drone footage updates, detailed breakdowns of social spending, where is welfare money actually going, even granular data on things like parliamentary attendance records, how specific representatives voted on key legislation.
Wow, that's radical transparency.
The goal is to replace the sort of default cynicism many citizens feel towards government, where does my tax money really go, with verifiable, easily accessible, active accountability. When you can see exactly how the machinery of government is operating, it empowers you to engage with it more effectively, to demand better performance based on actual data.
The sheer volume of data generated by tracking every transaction, every vote. It sounds like humans alone couldn't possibly monitor it all effectively.
You're absolutely right. That brings us to the third architectural piece, algorithmic anti-corruption.
Using AI to police the system.
Essentially, yes. We can't just rely on traditional human auditors wading through mountains of data after the fact. The system needs built-in automated vigilance. AI tools must be deployed to constantly analyze the patterns in public spending, contract awards, and tender processes.
What kind of patterns would an AI look for?
It wouldn't just be looking for obvious fraud like duplicate invoicing. It would be trained to detect subtle, predictive indicators of potential corruption or inefficiency. Things like statistically abnormal bidding patterns on contracts, non-random clustering of awards to connected individuals or companies, sudden unexplained spikes in expenditure just below mandatory reporting thresholds.
Things a human might miss, but an algorithm scanning millions of data points could flag.
Precisely. The system could automatically flag these anomalies in near real time and alert independent oversight bodies, or even the public, directly within minutes or hours. This shifts governance from being reactive, chasing scandals after they happen, to being inherently preventive. The system itself helps police its own integrity.
Okay, ledgers for data, dashboards for visibility, AI for vigilance. There's one more architectural element mentioned. Smart constitutions. That sounds quite futuristic.
It is, but the basic concept is about making the fundamental rules of the state executable by code. A smart constitution translates key parts of a nation's actual constitution or foundational laws into digital logic, embedded directly into the governing blockchain or network protocols.
So things like term limits for politicians, or rules about how budgets can be amended, or maybe certain inviolable human rights provisions. They wouldn't just be words on paper.
They would be embedded as rules in the code that runs the system. Think of them as smart contracts that govern the government itself.
What happens if, say, an official or a parliament tries to violate one of these coded constitutional rules, tries to spend money that wasn't legally allocated according to the smart constitution's rules?
Several things could happen, depending on the design. First, the attempted violation would be instantly and permanently recorded on the public ledger, total transparency. Second, and more powerfully, The system itself might simply refuse to execute the illegal action.
The code blocks it.
Yes. If an official tries to authorize a payment that exceeds a constitutionally coded budget limit or violates a rule about procurement processes, the smart contract governing that function simply wouldn't execute. It wouldn't release the funds or validate the action unless the predefined, transparent, legal process for overriding that rule, like, say, a recorded supermajority vote in Parliament, is followed. It makes the fundamental rules of the game harder to cheat.
That's a fascinating concept. It really shifts power towards the coded rules themselves. Now let's pivot slightly. We've talked about governing the state, but what about governing the data that fuels this whole system? The early internet led to what some call data empires, a few huge corporations controlling vast amounts of personal data. The manifesto argues we need to move towards data republics.
Yes, this is crucial. If we just replace opaque government control with opaque corporate control of data, we haven't really achieved the goal. A data republic implies a shift towards decentralization and citizen sovereignty over data.
How do you achieve that?
The manifesto advocates strongly for concepts like decentralized data cooperatives or DDCs.
Data co-ops, what are those?
Think of them like digital versions of agricultural or credit cooperatives. They would be community-led or citizen-owned platforms where individuals can choose to pool their anonymized or pseudonymized data. Maybe their health records for medical research, their mobility patterns for better city planning, their energy usage data.
But instead of a big tech company owning and monetizing that data,
The cooperative, owned by its members, the citizens who contributed the data, controls it. The DDC can then collectively bargain with private companies or public institutions that want access to that aggregated data.
so instead of Facebook or Google just taking my data and selling ads against it, my data co-op could negotiate for, say, better public services in my area, or direct payments back to the members, or ensure the data is only used for specific ethical research purposes.
Exactly. It restores data sovereignty and economic value back to the people who generate the data in the first place. It allows citizens to benefit collectively from their digital footprint rather than being mere data sources for large corporations.
That's one part. What else defines a data republic?
The manifesto also calls for a global digital commons charter. This would be like an international treaty or understanding,
Aimed at what?
aimed at guaranteeing open, equitable access for everyone to certain types of essential public interest data. Things like high-resolution global mapping data, crucial climate models and environmental data, fundamental scientific research, public health statistics.
Data that's vital for solving global challenges or enabling local innovation.
Precisely. The core belief here is that foundational knowledge, essential for human progress and well-being, shouldn't be locked up behind paywalls or controlled by a few entities. It should be treated as a global public good, like sunlight or clean air, accessible to all.
This is all incredibly powerful, almost utopian in its vision. But we absolutely have to talk about the dark side. Tools this powerful universal ID, cashless society, total financial transparency, AI monitoring, they carry immense risks if misused. What safeguards does the manifesto insist upon?
The authors are extremely clear that these tools are double-edged swords. Without robust safeguards built in from the start, this architecture could easily enable a surveillance state far beyond anything George Orwell imagined. They highlight several critical risks and necessary safeguards.
Okay, what's risk number one?
The most obvious one, surveillance creep. Tools designed for transparency of the state can inevitably be turned around to monitor citizens with terrifying granularity, tracking every purchase, every movement, every interaction.
So how do you prevent the reverse surveillance system from just becoming total surveillance?
The primary safeguard has to be architectural, not just political promises. Decentralization is key. Data must not be stored in one massive, easily accessible government honeypot. It needs to be fragmented, encrypted, perhaps using zero-knowledge proofs so verification can happen without revealing underlying data. And strong, independent, democratic oversight bodies with real teeth must be built into every single layer of the digital infrastructure. Oversight can't be an afterthought.
Okay, decentralization and oversight for surveillance creep. What's the next major risk?
Digital divide 2.0. We talked about the potential for inclusion, but there's also a risk that this transformation only benefits the already digitally savvy elite.
Leaving the poor, the elderly, the less educated further behind.
Exactly. If access to the digital ID, the digital wallet, the necessary devices, and the skills to use them isn't truly universal, then this system will simply amplify existing inequalities. It will create a two-tier world, the connected and empowered versus the disconnected and marginalized.
And the safeguard here.
This is framed as a fundamental moral priority. Universal access, affordable connectivity, accessible devices, widespread digital literacy training cannot be optional. It must be treated as a non-negotiable policy goal from day one, funded adequately, perhaps through those public funds we discussed. Ensuring the $50 trillion unlock benefits the many, not just the digitally adept few, has to be the driving principle.
Makes sense. What other risks are highlighted?
A more subtle but critical risk is algorithmic bias. We mentioned using AI for anti-corruption, but AI will likely also be used for things like credit scoring, allocating social benefits, maybe even predictive policing.
And if the AI is biased?
If the AI systems are trained predominantly on historical data, which often reflects past and present societal biases, racial, gender, economic reasons, then the algorithms will inevitably learn and perpetuate those biases. They might unfairly deny loans to certain groups or wrongly flag individuals from specific communities for suspicion.
So the technology ends up encoding discrimination into the very fabric of the new system.
That's the danger. It's a fundamental structural flaw if not addressed. The solution requires rigorous, mandatory ethical audits of all algorithms used in governance and finance. It demands proactive efforts to use diverse, inclusive training datasets, perhaps supplemented with carefully generated synthetic data specifically to counteract and mitigate potential biases. Fairness has to be engineered in.
Okay, surveillance, inequality, bias.
Mm-hmm.
What's the final major risk category?
Cybersecurity. A world running entirely on interconnected digital systems, digital ID, cashless finance, transparent ledgers becomes an incredibly attractive target for criminals, state-sponsored hackers, and even systemic failure.
If the core systems go down or get compromised, everything grinds to a halt. Trust collapses.
Exactly. Resilience is paramount. We need ironclad security protocols, constant vigilance against new threats, and robust backup systems. The manifesto emphasizes again that decentralization helps here. A distributed network is inherently harder to take down completely than a centralized one. But it also stresses the need for widespread citizen education on digital security and hygiene. Protecting the integrity and trustworthiness of the network is everyone's responsibility. Trust is the absolute cornerstone of this entire geometric edifice, and protecting it must be an unceasing commitment.
When you lay out all these pillars, the potential, the architecture, and the risks,
Mhm.
it feels like the Digital Geometry Manifesto moves beyond just a technical or economic argument. It seems to land on something more fundamental.
It absolutely does. Ultimately, the authors frame this entire project around a powerful moral imperative. It's about justice.
Justice, how so?
They argue that in the 21st century, the fundamental human rights necessary for dignity and participation have expanded. It's no longer just about freedom of speech or assembly. It now includes the right to connect, the right to transact freely and securely, the right to own property with certainty, and crucially, the right to know what your government is doing in your name with your resources.
These become foundational rights for the digital age.
Yes, and achieving these rights requires digital sovereignty, both for individuals controlling their own identity and data, and for nations.
What do they mean by national digital sovereignty?
A nation that cannot control the flow, storage, access, and governance of its own foundational data, its citizens' identities, its financial transactions, its public records is, in a very real sense, incomplete. Its political sovereignty is compromised.
That's a stark way to put it. A nation that outsources control of its core data infrastructure is essentially
A digital colony. A colony of the corporations or foreign powers that do control that infrastructure. Digital geometry, in this view, is ultimately about restoring a fundamental moral symmetry between the state and the citizen. It aims to shift the relationship away from one of subject and potentially opaque ruler towards one of empowered participant and transparent, accountable servant. It's presented as the necessary next stage of global independence and true self-governance in the digital era. Hashtag outro.
wow. Okay, this has been an incredibly detailed and I think fundamentally challenging deep dive. We started this conversation in a world largely defined by, well, invisible citizens in many places, opaque financial transactions, and deeply hierarchical power structures.
Mm-hmm.
And we've moved through what feels like a complete, sometimes radical, but internally consistent blueprint for a potential future civilization, one that aims to be, by design, flat, transparent, and radically inclusive.
That really is the synthesis, isn't it? The argument is that the age of empires built on secrecy, hierarchy, and the control of physical resources is waning. Civilization version 2.0, if it emerges along these lines, won't be defined by some grand new politicalism,
But by the structure of connection itself.
by the quiet mathematics of connection, the verifiable geometry of trust. The idea is that when every person, every place, every significant public process is connected via these transparent, verifiable, often immutable digital layers, humanity itself starts to function more like a self-aware network.
A network potentially capable of seeing and responding to planetary scale challenges like climate change, pandemics, systemic poverty, with the kind of unified visibility and coordination that's impossible today.
That's the ultimate promise, a more coordinated, intelligent, and equitable global system.
And the striking thing, as you've laid out, is that the core technologies needed for this transformation aren't science fiction anymore. They largely exist.
They do. The satellites are going up, the biometric ID systems have been proven at scale, blockchain and DLTs are maturing rapidly, AI is becoming incredibly powerful, the tools are either here or rapidly emerging.
Which leads directly to the final provocative question the manifesto leaves us, the listener, with. It's presented not as a technical question anymore, but as a choice.
Exactly. The only truly significant question that remains, according to the source material, is this. We now possess, or are rapidly acquiring, the technical infrastructure to potentially usher in an age of abundance, to unlock that $50 trillion in dormant wealth, to build visible governance, and to connect humanity in unprecedented ways.
The choice is.
Will we use these incredibly powerful tools primarily to empower and enrich the few, or will we make the conscious choice to use them to empower the many? That decision, the source argues, is the fundamental moral and political challenge that will determine the actual shape of the 21st century.